Well, unsurprisingly, I didn't receive any answer. You know, one advantage that someone who might work for ABC News has over this class is they're not students in my class. They don't have to answer a question. And so they ignored what I and many other people were saying. About a month later, word came out that, oh, we're sorry, there was some kind of technical problem which caused us to shut the board down. I don't believe that for a second. It's an awfully big coincidence that this problem happened right at the time that this controversy was arising. Now, had that been the only problem, I also wouldn't be up here talking about this, because people make mistakes. You know, I would be the first to say we talk about ABC, but what really might have happened in that instance was someone working on ABC's website, one particular human being might have panicked and shut down the system. So I'm willing to understand media are run by human beings, people make mistakes, but sadly, that was only the beginning, and only the beginning of a much worse series of incidents. So let's continue. Now let's go to July and early August. And here we find a very interesting series of media responses to the Ron Paul candidacy, and since our class is only 50 minutes in length, I'm not going to have time to go over every one in much detail. But again, you can find descriptions of them all over the web, including on my blog, infiniteregress.tv, but they're all over the place. The Iowa caucus, actually the Iowa straw poll for the Iowa caucus, because the actual Iowa caucus hasn't taken place yet, this was a straw poll that the people in Iowa participate in. And as I'm sure you know, a straw poll isn't binding, but it is an early indication of how people in the state of Iowa feel about their presidential candidates. And this was a straw poll for the Republican Party in the state of Iowa. Several interesting things happened. Here's one of them. Again, on abc.com's website, there were photographs, coverage of the supporters who had come to Iowa to demonstrate and show their support. And on one page in particular, there was a very interesting juxtaposition of photographs. On the one side, you had a photograph of a huge number of cheering people holding up signs for Mitt Romney. Right next to it, you had a photograph in which it said Ron Paul's supporters. In that photograph, there were a total of one person, one poor guy standing there, almost, you know, in this poignant, it could have been a scene out of a movie, standing there holding an umbrella to shield himself from the sun and holding up a Ron Paul placard. So if you had come to abc.com's website wondering what kind of reaction there was in Iowa to the Republican candidates, you would have gotten the unmistakable conclusion that Mitt Romney had a huge number of cheering supporters. Ron Paul had one poor guy who was in danger of getting sunstroke holding up this placard. Well, I did a little research. Again, you can as well. I've seen video coverage of this very rally, and I discovered, much to my chagrin for the media, that actually Ron Paul had a huge number of supporters also. Now, who knows who had more supporters? And I'm not saying anything against Mitt Romney's supporters. I'm willing to acknowledge Mitt Romney had a large number of supporters. But clearly, ABC.com was giving its readers the impression that Ron Paul had virtually no supporters, when in fact he had a lot of supporters. So now, let's just look at this progression. ABC.com starts off in May taking out comments by Ron Paul supporters. Not good, but I would admit not the worst infraction in the world. And within a month or two, they've now escalated into using an outrageously misleading, deceptive, and that's the only word for it, pair of photographs to show the relative strength of the supporters of two Republican candidates. Well, Ron Paul did not win the Iowa straw poll. He came in somewhere in the middle. After the results of the poll came in, and now we move from ABC.com to ABC television. So again, you can see the escalation, because many, many, many more people are watching television than come to a web page. George Stephanopoulos, if the name sounds familiar to you, he first became known during the Clinton administration. He was an advisor to former President Bill Clinton, and later went on to get a job at ABC News. And Stephanopoulos is now one of their prime commentators, political reporters. And there was a discussion in the Green Room. That's the name of a show on ABC. It takes place after the poll has taken place and the results have been reported. As some of you may know, the term green room comes from television. It's a place where the talent waits before they go on the show. Anyway, in this discussion, various candidates were mentioned, including people who did not do as well as Ron Paul. And I'm sure you can see where this is going. Ron Paul was not mentioned. It's as if he didn't exist. Now, here, let me say that so far I've concentrated on ABC, and there are a couple of other things I'm going to mention to you about ABC. But ABC is by no means the only media operation that has done this kind of stuff. And let me also say, Ron Paul is not the only political candidate who has suffered from it. So at this point, let me just spread out our focus and look at newspapers, and in particular the newspaper coverage of this Iowa straw poll, which again many people think to be an important first indication of how people may vote in this extremely important state. Well, I did a pretty extensive survey of the newspapers, and actually I was happy to find that the New York Times, they reported the results accurately. They had a complete list of all the candidates and how they did, and a little about each of them. USA Today, which by the way is the largest circulation newspaper in the United States, over 2 million circulation. They did a very good job. Associated Press isn't a newspaper, it's a news service, and I'm sure most of you have seen the AP byline. What the Associated Press does is they write up stories and then they send it out to thousands of affiliate newspapers around the country. They reported the results pretty well. One newspaper did not, the Washington Post.